Hey, welcome back to Bookish, everyone. Thanks for starting your weekend with us. As you know, many of you do, because we see you every month. We're your program on authors, thinkers, and the literary life produced by the Southern California News Group. I'm Sam Dunn. I'm the senior editor of premium content here. And I want to say thank you to our Reader Reward subscribers and really to all of you who come back every month for supporting our programs. If you are a Reader Rewards member attending tonight, again, you're automatically entered to win a $50 gift certificate to our partner and one of our favorite indie bookstores in the Los Angeles area, Once Upon a Time in Montrose. And if you aren't a subscriber yet, well, why aren't you a subscriber? Go to scng.com/subscribe and find your local paper. That way you're going to know all the things we've got going on. And also, if you've missed our past programs, go to scng.com/virtual programs and check them out. 2+ years of great stuff. Anyway, before we get started, let me remind you, sorry, long day. Let me remind you that you are muted, but if you have questions, and we hope you do, please use the Q&A feature on your Zoom toolbar. If you want to just add a comment or talk to other people, use the chat feature also found on your screen. Our SCNG Books editor, Eric Peterson, is the man behind the scenes as usual, and he's going to be there to answer your questions and give you some great links. Speaking of links, a link to the program will be sent to you so you can share or just revisit some of your favorite moments. It's also posted at scng.com/virtual events. And again, that's where you can find all of our past virtual shows and see what's coming up. Now, joining from the usual bohemian splendor of Pasadena is our most beloved host, Sandra Singh-Low. You've heard her as a regular commentator on NPR's Morning Edition and on This American Life and on Marketplace. And she also produces the syndicated radio minute, The Lowdown on Science. She's also a contributor to The Atlantic and the author of 7 books, I think 7. Well, yeah, 7, including her most recent, The Mad Woman and the Roomba. She's also got a couple performances coming up locally to check out. The Mad Woman of the Theater, 25 effing years of Sandra Singh-Low, which is a hilarious quasi-TED-style rant that's going to reveal Sandra's past artistic misadventures. And we've also got an introduction to her new comedy, The Mad Woman of the West, that will star former Bookish guest Carolyn Aaron, former Bookish guest Mary Lou Henner, upcoming guests, Melanie Marin and Jo Beth Williams, and that's going to be at the Odyssey Theater beginning May 26th. Welcome, Sandra. Hello, hello. Sandra, are you there? She's left me. There she is. There
Hello,
she is.
I'm unmuting, and you've been privileged to see the last version of the rough draft of the poster for the Mad Women of the West that I gave the professional graphic artist who has a real poster. But I was just really enjoying looking at my Photoshop handiwork, which is 25 effing years of theater, which is how life has gone for me.
It has indeed. Anyway.
But today, I mean, such a fabulous, eclectic, amazing group of writers. I think this hour is going to be one of our most fascinating ever. We have, as you can tell us.
Oh yeah, wait, did I miss my cue? We've got sure we do. We've got Rebecca Makkai, who is a Pulitzer Prize winning finalist and a National Book Award finalist, two finalists in one, and Chef Ronnie Woo.
And we'll get to him, in your interstitial segment.
And the amazing Tim Blake Nelson, who we love from The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, Oh Brother, We're Out Thou, and so many amazing character study pieces. But he's also got a new novel,
and he's a deep literary cat, if I may say, and we'll get
indeed
that also. But and we have so much to cover, and we're going to bring you back to keep massaging the show. So we'll say goodbye for a moment. And bring up thank you so much. Our first amazing writer. We can't believe we have her live, so let's get to her. Rebecca Makkai, the 30-second download. Rebecca Makkai is the author of the novels The Great Believers, The 100-Year House, The Borrower, and the short story collection Music for Wartime. A finalist, as Samantha mentioned, for the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award. The Great Believers received an American Library Association Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Fiction and a Los Angeles Times Book Prize. competitors, but we still honor them. And the prize, among other honors, was named one of the 10 best books of 2018 by the New York Times. A Guggenheim Fellow, Makkai is on the MFA faculties at University of Nevada, Reno, at Lake Tahoe, and Northwestern University is the artistic director of Story Studio, Chicago. She lives on the campus, and you'll see this will be interesting, on the Midwestern boarding school where her husband teaches, and in Vermont. Her brilliant, critically acclaimed, wildly best-selling new novel is I Have Some Questions for You. A warm welcome, Rebecca. Thank you.
Thank you.
We're so thrilled to have you. Okay, so for those new to your work and your book, you've described I have some questions for you as this is such a setup question, but here we go. As a literary feminist boarding school murder mystery.
Mm-hmm.
Describe.
Yeah, I mean that's accurate. It is, not partaking of some of the tropes of murder mysteries or crime novels, but it is about a crime. And it is the kind of book where by the end you kind of know who did it. We have a protagonist, Bodhi. She's 40 years old, and she's invited back to teach for 2 weeks on the campus of the New Hampshire boarding school that she attended in the 90s as a scholarship kid. And she's back to teach a class on film history and one on podcasting. Those are the two things she does. And while she's back, her mind is, of course, on her time there, specifically on the death of a young classmate their senior year. This young woman who was found dead in the campus pool with significant injuries to her body. A young Black man who worked at the school as an athletic trainer was very quickly arrested for the crime, even confessed, but then recanted. And it really seems like it's been solved, but a lot of people online believe otherwise. And as Bodhi is there and as one of her podcasting students starts to dig into it, she starts to come to be of the same opinion, and we go from there.
Well, yes, and I think that when I was reading it, it's sort of like, and we'll get to it, it's sort of like noir used to illuminate like Los Angeles back in the day. And this is kind of the new noir that almost illuminates the whole social media world and Reddit in a really kind of fascinating way. But in terms of your writing process, and I think you started this, I'm going to say in 2019, some writers are inspired by dialogue and character, and you've written that you're inspired by places.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
Yeah, setting and also plot. I mean, there's, are two things that really get me going. I feel like a novel, I write short stories too. And that's like you're taking a vacation to a little place for a month, right? A novel, it's like you're moving there for 5 years, 6 years. And it's got to be a place I want to be. It doesn't mean that pleasant things have to happen, right? But the milieu matters, the setting matters. I've got to be talking about a place, and it's not just geographic, but everything about it, where I really want to spend time because I'm going to be living there in my head for a while. And in this case, this kind of, New Hampshire old school vibe, this boarding school, very, historic place, but also this very transitory place seemed like a really juicy locale for a book.
Yeah, and it's both welcoming with sort of the beautiful light and the history, but also dangerous. And I think the way that you paint the picture is that we want to be in that world, but it's also a little spooky and fascinating. So, and I think that, part of the plot of this journey is around the Me Too stuff. And it's told in such a shaded, though an interesting way. And I think that you're, in terms of when you talk about your character, Buddy is both I think she thinks she's an outsider, but was kind of an insider. Right. And she's sort of been, let's say, a victim, but in a way she's not a perpetrator exactly. I mean, complex characters. Can you talk about how important it was, I don't know, in this feminist journey to paint really complex portraits?
Yeah, I mean, thematically, one of the things the novel is about is the systems that we are part of, wittingly or unwittingly. And those could be systems like, a boarding school, even one where you felt like a huge outsider. It could be something like the patriarchy, where you can be a victim of it and part of it at the same time. It's the institution of whiteness. It's the carceral system. It's all these different things that you might have chosen to buy into, or in many cases you didn't, but you're still a part of that system. And this character is, doing some of the work of figuring out what that means and what she might have overlooked, because we all thought we were outsiders in adolescence. Who on earth did not think they were an outsider, right? I've never met that person. And yet, you might, you just because you felt like an outsider doesn't mean that you weren't doing damage or harm. It doesn't mean that you didn't take part in things or stand by when things happened. And a lot of Me Too was us looking back. There were the big things. There's the Matt Lauer, Harvey Weinstein stuff, right? But there's also all of us just looking back in middle school, high school, college, and on hallway harassment, on casual rape culture, and going, oh my God, what? First of all, I was upset. I had every right to be upset. I'm still upset. Wait a second. And also going, I can't believe that we not only put up with that stuff, I can't believe we stood by, or, I'm sure for a lot of men looking back, I can't believe we participated in that. And that's, certainly, you're right. I started writing this book in 2019. That was very much on my mind, continues to be. Most of the book is set in 2018. And this is someone doing that same thing of looking back and going, hold on, this doesn't look the same through modern eyes.
Yeah, and it's so visceral the way that you tell it. But I should say, as we have, because viewers of this program read all kinds of books, that I think men will really enjoy this book.
I hope so.
I mean, it is for everyone, because one of the characters that you touch on in this whole stew of politics is someone who reminded me of a character called the Mattress Girl, of kind of like on, I think, the Columbia campus of sometimes in the tenor of the Me Too movement, of kind of like sometimes when the victims would speak out, the men, and I think that's very much a plot line in your book as well, which makes it really rich and interesting.
Yeah, it's messy, right? The last thing I want to do as a novelist is to come down with a thesis statement. I want to take the questions I already have and complicate those and find the contradictions. And there are some clear-cut things within this book, but then there are things that, to my narrator at least, there are accusations leveled against her ex-husband that she feels like go way too far and are not on the same plane. Those conversations that we cannot really have productively on Twitter. That's what art can do, though, without coming down with, hey, here's my worldview, because I don't know what my worldview is all the time. Art can ask those questions. Art can just kind of participate in those conversations and muck around in that tar pit. That's what we're doing.
Yeah, and I think as opposed to Twitter, something like the podcast form, and of course our main character is a podcaster, a podcast teacher, and we both have a fascination with radio and public radio, and the podcast serial was by the This American Life people. I mean, was that fun for you to play with the idea of storytelling as a novel, but also how podcasts tell stories? And what was that like for you?
Right. I mean, a podcast is, it is this very modern form of storytelling. I think it's also a very modern way to be a detective. If you look back at Agatha Christie has these kind of citizen detectives and then professional detectives, and that those have been kind of the two models for a long time, right? Either you have Jessica Fletcher or you have, and there's something about the podcaster, because podcasts and, true crime, the first podcast that most people listened to was a true crime podcast. There's something about that medium for that kind of story that feels really germane. And it is quite logically where some detective work is coming from right now. So just, kind of going with realism on that in some ways, right? But yeah, I'm also really interested in the way that my character, Bodhi, thinks in her podcast is about women in Hollywood, about the abuses of women by the early 20th century Hollywood studio system. It's a student's podcast that actually starts looking back into this murder. But she's someone who is used to thinking about the retelling of stories. You think who Rita Hayworth was, but actually here's who she really was. Let's look at the systems around her. Let's look at, what went wrong. But it's very hard for people to do that kind of thinking about their own lives. It's very hard for people to recognize that they might have gotten things wrong about real people they really know, about their own past. And so although she's really versed in that kind of thinking and that kind of storytelling, it's a real effort for her to turn that same lens onto her own past and her own life and think in similar ways.
Which is what makes great reading, because you talk about memory being so fallible that sometimes you think you don't remember, suddenly you do, and other details come out. And that's, I think, makes the book fascinating reading, but also it's inadvertently kind of wry with some real humor about the high seriousness of podcasts as well.
Right. Yeah, I have a hard time being serious. I write serious. Everything I write is serious in its intent, but I guess I have a hard time not also poking fun at everything that I'm talking about, because everything's funny. The world is funny.
Yeah, and the upswell of music underneath the end of an episode.
Yes, yeah, exactly.
So it is, because we only have a short time. I mean, your literary, the books that you read are astonishing at kind of your breadth of reading. And we're going to, even though many books on your nightstand, you confess you don't always finish, but still your breadth of the library is huge. But I think there's been someone asked you a very interesting question about your literary influences. And you kind of had this amazing answer about related to Montessori school teaching.
Oh, that, yeah. Not so much a literary influence as like a storytelling influence, but I taught Montessori elementary school for 12 years. It was wonderful. I didn't realize at the time, I realized later what reading aloud for half an hour every day to a bunch of kids did to me. Because, and I'm reading like, Lois Lowry or whatever, I'm not reading stuff I wrote, but you can see the second kids get bored. You can also see when they get confused. You can see when they're like, just don't care. But when they get bored, because they're rolling around on the floor, they're like, getting into trouble. Like, why do you have the craft scissors? What's going on over there, Matthew? And I internalized that. That was 12 years of every single school day. I think that it can be really easy for writers to just kind of be like, I'm going to write, it's my art, people will come to it, they will listen, they will of course be riveted. And it's another thing to be confronted day after day with how easy it is to lose people. And to lose their attention, right? And of course, I'm not writing for kids, right? I'm writing for adults, but you still have to earn their attention. You still have to get people to pick that book back up or to turn the page. And it's just something very visceral for me, that understanding of where I might lose people. Because, we're all just big kids. We all just need to be entertained at the same time that we're doing some serious thinking.
No, and I love that. People should definitely go to your website and read all your essays on writing, which are really kind of a masterclass. And I think I love the way that you balance this storytelling with your great essay on Cheever, for those who are Cheever fans, and the short story, and how when language comes in, they should just read it about like the endings of certain stories, and when the poetry comes in, but it's not overtly done, it's brilliantly done in your book. And so how great that we have literary books now like yours who are also amazingly fun to read. And speaking of books, can you talk a little bit about your 84 books project?
Yes, I would love to. Yeah. So my father passed away in 2020 in Hungary, where he lived, and was not able to get there for the memorial service. So my memorial, he was a linguist and a poet, but he was also a literary translator. And so I decided that what I'm doing is I'm reading my way around the world, sort of Amazing Race style, if that makes sense, reading books in translation. So I started in Hungary. I'm going to end in Hungary. He lived to be 84. I'm reading 84. So I just worked my way down. I've been on book tour, so it's been a little slow, but I just finished Turkey. I'm on my 7th book, which is a Syrian novel by a living author. They're not all, I'm also, it's like I've been reading for so long, because of professional obligations, nothing but contemporary American fiction. And I need to read poetry and plays. I need to read stuff from 1912. I need to read, just everything. So I've been having a blast, and I've been writing about it on my Substack. I've been writing about it on social media. So I have people reading with me, which is really fun, and people recommending books if they're really familiar with that country or the literature of that language, things like that. So,
and is this, we're stacking it all together. I know you're working on a new novel now, and as you go around the world and think about people in different places, can you talk just a little bit about that? I know it's a work in progress, but
yeah, I'm very careful and cryptic with what I say, but here's what I have been saying is that it has to do with 1930s Germany. Not necessarily entirely set in 1930s Germany, but it's not a Holocaust book, and it's not about war. It's some other stuff, but is thematically in many ways about complicity, political complicity, and that's something that I feel like is important to be thinking about and writing about right now. So that is and been able to that you mentioned my Guggenheim in my intro, which I'm so grateful for. I used that to travel to Germany this last fall and do some research. I gave up on Duolingo Hungarian after like 2 weeks. That was not happening. I got to like Wo ist der Bahnhof and I'm done. But I've had a wonderful time visiting nonetheless.
What is kind of the greatest gift that you could give our viewers? Some are aspiring writers, some continue to be aspiring readers to read as deeply and vastly, but the 2 weeks of Hungarian Duolingo is the gift that you give us, being so impressive.
It's the German. Here's the thing. That's the German that I gave up on. The Hungarian one I'm still doing because I'm not much of a masochist, because I'm still working my whole life. I'll be working on Hungarian. The German was the one I wimped out on. I was like, I don't care. I'm done. So.
Ach du Liebe, ach, stay away. Thank you. So, Dankeschön, Dankeschön to you.
I understood that. See,
Yeah.
that part's easy.
And torta, that's about all I have. Okay. Thank you so much congratulations. It's just so thrilling to see your work, see how it's being received, and just have the joy of reading it. And thank you so much for speaking to us. It's been an honor.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, all right. The great Rebecca Makkai, her brilliant new novel is I Have Some Questions for You, and it's just out. So Samantha Dunn, will you rejoin me as we bring on our next guest?
Here I am. That was fantastic.
I mean, and it's kind of like when we see our author, well, we call them our authors, like now we own them, but just kind of the humility and the thoughtfulness and the depth of curiosity and also reading to those children, it's kind of like so unpretentious. And
I love that. I said I love that awareness of audience. I said that in the chat. It was so refreshing to hear an author of her caliber talk about that, that forward-facing attitude toward readers. I loved it. Anyway, yes.
Okay, so we're switching, although I think by the end of the show, we'll be returning to some of these themes perhaps in another way. So we're switching for something we don't always do on this show. Yes. We have just be ready. Okay, and this was my friend Gina Kronstadt is watching this, and she had a sort of tough week. Everybody has had a cold or whatever. And I go, well, we're going to have in my text, celebrity chef, former model, Ronnie Woo. And it's like, woo! And kind of like, and I go, that is so after kind of the whole Me Too themes of this. And then I'm going, Ronnie Woo, about cheesecake, or something about, I said like but he is, as you'll see, he is adorable, and he is a celebrity chef, and his cookbook, which is so wonderful and so accessible, does in fact have photos of him kind of lounging by the barbecue. And,
cool. Well, let's not forget, Sandra, that one of our fans here who comes back month after month, John Halligan, has said that we are, what can I say? We are the babes of Zoom. So thank you, John Halligan, for appreciating.
It's kind of like, I'm 61. I made the mistake of washing my hair, and never wash your hair just before a Zoom. It's like, so just go with the dirty hair. So anyway, so we appreciate that. And
yes.
appreciate actually all of our reader mail that makes us feel sort of wanted, sometimes corrected, sometimes loved, and whatever. And kind of it sets the tonality for, I think, the family that we have on this show.
Absolutely, and always inspired, and keep it coming, you guys. We'll have the address later and I'll put it in the chat, but keep them coming. Anyway, get to it, girl.
Yeah, so much so. So I just want to say thank you and then pop back after this and we'll chat again. So just Ronnie Woo is the founder, let me say, of The Delicious Cook, an LA-based private chef company that specializes in 4-star dining experiences. He's an accomplished chef, culinary personality, and he's created sort of creative, what he calls Cali Asian cuisine, which combines fresh California flavors with Asian influences. He was the chef and host of the Cooking and Relationship Show, and you'll see him on that. Touch on that in a moment. Food to Get You Laid, and regular appearances on the Today Show, the Kelly Clarkson Show, Rachel Ray, Food Network, The Kitchen, Beat Bobby Flay, Netflix, and Peacock. Most recently was a celebrity judge on Netflix's Is It Cake? His really super fun new book is Did You Eat Yet? Just released. We spoke to Ronnie a couple of days ago. Please enjoy. Oh my God, Ronnie, we're so excited to have you on the program. I loved your book so much. It's unfortunate that we only have 15 minutes to talk. So let's start. Can you actually, before we go into the wonderful food, can you tell our viewers a little bit of your journey to become a brilliant chef?
Gosh, I'm not sure if I can tell you all in 15 minutes, but I'll do my best to tell you in a small snippet so we have time to talk. So I actually started out as a young boy. So I'll just tell you my adulthood. I first started out as a model, actually. My first job was actually at McDonald's, and then my second job was a model. So it was kind of like a really strange transition. So I kind of maybe started out as in food, if you could say McDonald's is food. I mean, McDonald's is food, it's delicious. So I started out working at McDonald's when I was 15, and then 6 months later, I transitioned into becoming a model. And so I did that throughout high school, and then I went to 1 year of college at University of Washington. And then after 1 year, I actually moved to Los Angeles to become a model. I modeled for like a year. I was also a personal trainer. And then after that year, I started going back to school to get my undergrad degree, and I continued modeling. And then after my undergrad degree, I actually went into getting 2 master's degrees, one in marriage and family therapy and one an MBA. And after that, I had this moment where I was like, what do I really want to do? I got the MBA because, I guess I wouldn't say I was lost, but I didn't know what I want to do for a profession. And so I figured an MBA is always going to be helpful. And a marriage and family therapy master's, I really actually wanted to help people with relationships. That was sort of my goal. I had this affinity towards just like wanting people to be in happy relationships. And so I ended up getting those 2 master's degrees, but then I had my epiphany, and it was like, what do I really want to do? I'm young right now. So I was like, you know what? I want to do food. And I was like, it's either now or never. And I've always been in the mindset of like, I just want to, if I want to do something, I'm going to do it right away, because I don't want to have any regrets in my life. And that was sort of how it started. I never looked back, to be honest, obviously, since I'm here 15 years later.
And it makes so much sense, though, that you really want to make people happy, because that infuses your book. It's about happiness. It's like, tell a little about your mother and just what food was like in your family.
Yeah, so I grew up in I should have started out with saying that I grew up in a family that loves food, mainly because, my parents, both of them equally love food. And it was always very much like traveling to places that were like foodie destinations. Like, did it have good food? Then my parents wanted to go, and they wanted to take their kids. And so I was really, really lucky that my parents were always on the lookout for just new locations. And it didn't really matter where. It was like, just as long as the food is good. They have such an open palate, and they love all kinds of food, which is amazing. And I'm very lucky to have parents like that. And so the title, it's funny because in my book, I actually mentioned that my mom is a really great cook and my dad is a really great eater. So they kind of make, they're dysfunctional in all their ways, but after 40 some years of marriage, it's like you're gonna have some dysfunction. But my mom, because she's a good cook, the thing she always says to me is, "Did you eat yet?" Or in Chinese, it's which is like, have you eaten? If you directly translate, it's, have you eaten rice yet? Or have you eaten dinner yet? And so, I was like, it was sort of an obvious choice for the title, and no one had done it before. And everyone I spoke to about it, like people like got it, like they just kind of understood the question and the title of my book. And it wasn't like just Asian families; it was like people from all across different cultures. And so I was like, okay, I feel like this is sort of a winner in the sense that I think people can relate to it. And it's just like a way of saying, like, either I love you, I want to take care of you, I want to nourish you. And I think that is like so powerful, because I think ultimately, like, whenever people come over to my house, it's like I just want to feed them, and I'll be like, have you eaten yet? I don't want them to be hungry. That's like the biggest thing. That's like the cardinal sin. And and we have so much, like, obviously food scarcity in the world, and people are dealing with hunger. And I think that's why it's such an important thing to provide food. And I just always like want to make sure people are well fed, people I know. And
no, and speaking of Asian food and your mother being a great cook, and I think I think about the pandemic, where we in our family we did a lot of door dashing of Thai food, Chinese, right? So your cookbook, it's so accessible. But if you could just say, what do you find that people, regular cooks, not brilliant, find most challenging about attempting to cook Asian food? And you do some great breakdowns of like a char siu bao bacon. Like, it's like it's so exciting. I have not cooked any of these recipes yet, but I'm going to start this weekend. What do you find and I've been trying to cook Asian food, and I'm half Chinese, and it can be quite a journey. What do you find most challenging about starting to cook Asian food?
Yeah, for sure. I think, like, my book isn't full. I wouldn't say it's fully Asian. Like, it's not traditional Asian. I actually just wrote an article about authenticity in food and sort of what it means. And I think my book is not traditional. It's authentic to me. So, there's a lot of sort of like integration of my Asian heritage, my American upbringing, and then also my travels. But if people are looking to be introduced to it, or just like, if they just love good food. But I think, to answer your question, I think people have this notion that maybe like Asian cooking has a lot of like unusual ingredients or things you can't find. And I think maybe like 20 years ago, like, ingredients were hard to find. But I think nowadays every supermarket has, fish sauce, has oyster sauce, soy sauce, obviously. And the thing is, like, I think I want people to know is, like, you can substitute certain ingredients for other ingredients. Like, it doesn't have to be exact. It doesn't have to be perfect. As long as, it tastes good, or you're just having fun cooking the recipe, I think that's really what's most important. As far as my recipes in the book go, I think it's really just, it's just a sort of combination of the different sort of influences I've had in my life. And so to me, that is authentic, and that's the kind of food that I eat, and that's the kind of food that I grew up eating. I sort of have a lot of recipes that are inspired by my mom, but I'll do my own take on them, because, like, either may I think it's better, or or maybe I'll just keep her recipe, whatever it is. And then there's recipes that I just created on my own, because I'm like, these are the kind of flavors that I like, and these are the ingredients that I like, and so I just wanted to combine the different aspects of my experience in my life.
It's such a fun cookbook, and it has, of course, many recipes, including mac and cheese with a little tomato paste. Like, it is really, you can eat your way through this book. And I love, you have some boba type hacks, which is good for my kids who spend a fortune on boba, of course. And I think also in Southern California, like, I kept going sambal oelek, and at one point you put sriracha sauce is fine. I go, that I could get, like it.
Yeah.
So I think people will be invited as they cook their way through this book, because you can do this, you can do that, and it's a really fun Southern California thing. You do have a couple of rants in this book that I find a little bit hilarious, like
Tell me.
mini rants, and that's why reading one's way through this book is super fun. For instance, like, Ronnie, how do you feel about subbing cauliflower for carbs?
Oh my gosh, this is an ongoing debate since the beginning of time. I just with cauliflower, you know, people always like, oh, I have cauliflower pizza crust or cauliflower nachos, and I'm like, it's not nachos without the chips, and it's not a pizza without the crust that's made out of real flour. So I'm sorry, you can call it whatever you want. It doesn't taste like that. And I'm very adamant about that. But I do have one recipe in my book that is, I do like a cauliflower polenta. And, you know, I say it's like similar because I'm able to get the cauliflower into a polenta consistency. And if you think about polenta is, you know, it started out as corn, so I guess it's kind of a vegetable. So if you substitute with cauliflower, it's not the biggest stretch. But the point is, like, you know, in my little rant, I was just kind of like, you know, cauliflower for carbs is not a real thing because you know, if I want to eat carbs, I know people have real gluten intolerance, so that's a real legitimate thing. But if you don't, and you're just doing it for whatever to be trendy, then I'm always like, you know what, just eat the bread. Like, you know, we're humans. We are only on this earth for a certain amount of time. Sometimes you just gotta eat the bread. Like it's like a mental health thing. You know what I mean? Like you will go crazy, like if you don't. So that was my little rant in the book.
Well, that was
Keep
hilarious.
in mind, I don't have, it's not all rants. It's just maybe a couple and then a couple, like, you know, more fun stories than not.
No, so such fun stories. And I love the way you defend eggplant.
Yeah, eggplant gets a bad rep. I think people don't really like, people don't really know how to like cook eggplant. So in my recipe, I have one of my favorite things is just like really silky smooth, like eggplant, and there's ways to get it to like a silky smooth consistency, like a nice, like sort of almost braised, fall apart mouth in your mouth eggplant with some rice is like a dream to me. So I have a recipe in there that sort of accomplishes that.
Right, to get over its bad reputation. And I think that people should also know, because they have to run out and buy your book, even like velveting chicken, there are really interesting techniques in there to get some of the stuff that we're kind of door dashing and Uber Eatsing. And I think that's one great, like for instance, like velveting chicken. Can you just say what that is for a moment?
Yeah, of course. Velveting chicken is like a technique in sort of a lot of times Asian cooking, and it's really just to tenderize the chicken and make it a little, just like sort of keep it moist, almost give it like a smoother texture, if that makes any sense. So it's less like, so it has, you know, it has less of a like a jerky consistency if you overcook it, and more of like a smoother consistency. And it also helps thicken the sauce as well, because it's really just a little bit of cornstarch and like a soy sauce or a little bit of liquid that really helps to velvet the chicken. And, you know, if you're getting like Chinese takeout and you're always like, oh, this meat is always so like tender and like juicy and moist, like that's a result of velveting. And so it's super simple. It's velveting sounds so like complex, but it's really just like, you know, sliced pieces of meat, and you're just adding a little bit of cornstarch and like, you know, maybe soy sauce or a little bit of water, whatever it is that you have to velvet it. And that's it. It's pretty simple. And then you obviously give it a quick like browning before you cook the rest of it. But it kind of like, I wouldn't say it traps the moisture in there, but for lack of a better word or description, it sort of traps the moisture in there. And then you can have this like delicious, luscious chicken and sauce all at the same time.
And I mean, and what I love about your book, and what everybody will love about it when they snap it up, is there is, you know, it's almost a contradiction in terms like a former model, like loves to eat. And I think it's interesting the way that you thread that path, because I am a 61-year-old postmenopausal lady who one of those carb, you know, it doesn't, what can I even do? It's hopeless. It's baked chips. Why? So you have a whole section on rice at the beginning. And I was like going, yeah, good for you to say, Ronnie. I'm looking at your photos, you're cut, you've got the 6-pack at you. Yeah, eat all the rice you want. I can't. But what's great is that you do have some zoodles in there.
I do.
And, okay, can you tell us a little bit about, like, for me, that's what I'll be cooking. Just what's your spin on zoodles?
At first I was very against zoodles and like vegetable noodles, like, you know, because you can make vegetable noodles out of carrots and anything that you can spiralize. And it was very much like I was very much against it. And I think obviously, as you get older, your body changes and it's a lot harder to stay sort of in shape or to stay healthy. And obviously, you're just a little bit more aware. You can't really beat your body up as much as you did before. But at the same time, you know, I always say life is like a balance. Like you have to sometimes eat the carbs, because if you don't, you know, so, you know, to talk about, I was like, in regards to zoodles, I'm a fan of them now, because it's just really about cooking them very quickly so they don't fall apart. But if you actually cook them super quick, they are actually quite satisfying. And they sort of have this like slurpy texture. You can slurp up like real noodles. But with that being said, like, I think that it's all about balance. Like, you know, for me, you know, I do try to stay in shape. And, you know, I try to eat healthy on certain days, and then I do allow myself to just eat whatever I want on like the weekends or the cheat days. You know, and so I eat the rice, but I don't eat it every single day. And that's sort of, it's about balance, because, you know, in a sort of a parallel way, it's like, you without the good, you can't have the bad. And I wouldn't say healthy food is bad, but without sort of healthy food, you wouldn't enjoy the indulgent food as much, and vice versa. So I think, that's sort of my mantra sort of with everything, but especially in food, it's like, you got to have balance, because you can't eat indulgent foods every day, but you also can't eat healthy every single day. Like, it's just mentally not good for you. At least for me, mentally, I need it.
Alternate book title: Have you eaten rice yet? And what day is it? Your book is fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us. It is just a delight, and I'm going to give my kids that are 21 and 22 a copy, like college or whatever. It's a wonderful book, and so funny and great and helpful and warm, and we hope to see you again soon.
Oh, well, thank you so much for having me. It was a lot of fun chatting with you, and we'll definitely see you guys soon.
You know, I love on this show that we go from Rebecca Makkai to zoodles, that everyone's getting so funny, and he said, eat them. So because we're all now starving, I'm going to make this as quick as I possibly can. But with our final guest, I don't want to So, you know, many years ago, we used to write Buzz magazine. It was a city magazine. There was always like the cool list of kind of like.
You wrote for it. I had articles killed in it. So yes.
And it was always the 50 coolest people in LA, and all these publicists would frantically fax, that was in the day, of how their clients wanted to be cool, which is of course the opposite of cool. Okay, right. But if you really wanted to be cool, you didn't really care.
If you're going to be pitched, you're not going to be on the cool list. It's just
exactly. So I was so delighted to see the Oscars recently. I don't always watch. And I think for me, it was like old home, like Judd Hirsch. And then who can not love Michelle Yeoh? 60. Also, Jamie Lee Curtis, 64, winning Best Oscars. And also noting that winning for Best Animation feature was Guillermo del Toro, who was the first interviewer on the book tour of our next guest, who doesn't, Tim Blake Nelson, who of course would be too cool to mention it. As you'll see in the interview we just did with him, he's the actor that, I think it's mentioned in the interview, that his agent called and said, Steven Spielberg wants to cast you in his movie, and you didn't have to read. And he goes, can you send me the script?
I love that. I loved it.
How cool is that? Because he wants to get, right? How cool is that? And I think that you'll see he is the actor known for, you know, films like, as you said, Syriana, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? The Ballad of Buster Scruggs. He's also a really, really deep writer who trained at Juilliard. And I think that you'll see in this interview that we caught him, I think it was on Vancouver, on set on Saturday, where he is so professional at the beginning and got right on time. And then it's so fun to see him explode with enthusiasm about his own writing, and his book is fantastic, and the book is City of Blows.
City of Blows. I will get off. Let's start.
Okay, thank you. Enjoy those snacks. Tim Blake Nelson, so thrilled to have you on the program, and your book City of Blows is fantastic. It's a fantastic read. But before we get to the book itself, you know, people know you as an actor, of course, from Syriana, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, which I adored. But you're also an accomplished playwright, Eye of God, Socrates, and screenwriter, Leaves of Grass and Anesthesia. So what pulled you to writing a novel?
I had a play that was about to go up in New York, that play you just mentioned, Socrates, and I had a few screenplays I was moving toward production, and I really didn't want to muddy the waters with another scripted narrative. And so I'd always wanted to try and write a novel, and I had some time. So I said, I'll try this, and just as an exercise. And it started to crystallize, and I got into the rhythm of writing prose every day. Again, without any expectation that I would ultimately share it with anyone. There really wasn't, honestly, any confidence even that would happen, because it was my first try at writing a novel. I just wanted to challenge myself, and it started to build day by day, and suddenly I became more and more excited, and I was writing a novel that I was going to share.
Well, it's so fantastic, and it moves really quickly. It does not read like a first novel, and I think that and we're going to talk about the substance of it. These City of Blows, these guys in Hollywood. So it is a Hollywood novel, fascinating read. I mean, and I think the way that you're acting, like maybe ties with your writing. These characters are so rich, and the dialogue is so fantastic, and it has a rhythm that it keeps going faster and faster before you get to the ending. It's a great plot. So did you start with the characters? I mean, what was the germ of the idea?
The germ of the idea was my desire to depict a character whom I consider, for better and worse, a dying breed in Hollywood, which is the older producer who is able to make decisions independent of any corporate structure, rather more on impulse motivated by taste, and a gut instinct about narrative viability and muscularity on screen, rather than what's going to make money or please shareholders. And so I started with one such character, a septuagenarian, actually he's almost 80, who is going to make one last great film. And I'd heard this story about one such producer. This character is not based on any single person, but I'd heard a story about one such producer, and I just started from his childhood, and I started with that, just to introduce a character. Because you're right, as an actor, I am interested in the deeper motivations of people, in terms of backstory and psychology. And the novel, more than any other form, allows a storyteller really to delve into background.
Yeah, and I think you said even as an actor, and of course there's amazing stories of like when Steven Spielberg called you, like wanted you for a movie, and you said, can I see the script first? Like everybody, and I think you said out of your own humility to see if you can bring it. But I think even the way you have talked about acting, where you go, you even as a character, you need to know the spine of the story and how your characters kind of, can you talk about that, like almost a paint in this canvas?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. And I appreciate that. I guess you've done a little bit of reading of my some interviews I've done. But yeah, the way I was trained, which was in a very traditional way that goes, has its roots really in Russian theater.
You mean?
Juilliard, yeah. Was to understand the bigger picture of a narrative, which when I was in school, they called the spine. And only one person is the protagonist. And usually as an actor, I'm not playing the protagonist. I'm playing some outlandish character adjacent to the protagonist. Sometimes just a person who walks down a single hallway with the protagonist and gives a bit of information, and then you never see him or her again. And that it's important to subordinate yourself to the bigger picture of the story. And I do like to think of it as being like a hue or a paint color in an abstract painting that maybe just has presence in a certain couple of areas on the canvas, but isn't necessarily the dominant one. And I think it's important to understand from a narrative point of view in a novel. I guess what I learned, and this is really I don't know what the segue is to this, because I actually found it was very different in the novel. In what I wrote in City of Blows, there is kind of a central character with whom the audience, I think, probably identifies more than anyone else. That's this character named David Levitt. But really, there are 4 main characters. You could argue even 5 or 6. And I've always appreciated, one of my favorite novelists is Dostoevsky. And I've always appreciated, and what I love about a Dostoevsky novel or a Tolstoy novel, these big 19th century Russian novels, is that they don't adhere to the Aristotelian structure of a single protagonist and everybody else tying in. You get rather this, you get a gathering of people, and the canvas is bigger, and the novel is about something more than a single character's journey and change. They're more societal. And ultimately, even though I set out to write in City of Blows about this one character as a representation of a type of character, I ended up writing about a group of characters as a way of examining not only Hollywood, but cultural fault lines in America right before COVID.
Yeah, and class, class distinctions. And I think also in painting this picture, you have names of different parts of, like Malibu, Beverly Hills, Chateau Marmont. Then you also have Van Nuys, which I appreciate. So it is also a fascinating picture of the film industry. First of all, also even David, who goes to Juilliard, even like how they do Shakespearean dialogue, which is sort of interesting, never stress a pronoun or a not or no. So it's fascinating reading, but also the economics of the film industry is just really a fascinating picture as well. So you do really get the sense of this world and the richness of it, and men versus women. It is such an interesting dynamic there also. And I should say, obviously, a main character, one of the delicious delights of reading this book, and is, I have to say, and there's a character that seems to be like a Harvey Weinstein type of character, but he's not called that, to see kind of bad guys get their comeuppance.
Yeah, I mean, and my agenda wasn't, I have to say, although I'm delighted that does happen. I'm not taking the side of the bad guys here, but I have to say that really what motivates that trajectory in the book is that for the time period that the book is exploring, that's actually thankfully what was happening. And what I wanted to do with the character you're mentioning of Charlie Gold, because so many people know about how a man like Harvey Weinstein, about the results of what it was he did. Few people know the mechanics of it and why people like that were able to get away with it. And hopefully what the book does is unveil the details of complicity that is perpetrated by an entire industry, so that the agents were letting it happen, assistants were letting it happen, sometimes female assistants were abetting the behavior, the newspapers were abetting the behavior by not telling the story because they didn't want to lose ad revenue. It's more of a global look at it all.
And that was fascinating with the newspapers, that I hadn't thought about the big ads that movie companies will buy and then others will follow, and that then the reporters are complicit. It really is a fascinating look into changing culture. Said, but I have to say that even though the Charlie Gold, and those and you described those scenes so incredibly. I was sort of screaming while reading them, the blow by blow of how those violations occurred. But I think that it's also fascinating the way but they're still interesting to read about. And by going into some of the boyhoods of some of these guys, you get, I think one time you said about acting is that no matter if your character is good or bad, I think Buster Scruggs is an example of kind of, he's mellow on the outside, but has a bit of not a violent streak, that you have to advocate for your character. And I found that you were doing that with your writing by giving us portraits of, you could understand why some of these guys were kind of like they were. Was that important to you to?
It certainly is. And again, it's not ever to apologize for any of the characters, but we do wonder, since there's not pure good in the world, there can't be pure evil or pure venality. And so, and then you get into, well, is it environmental? Is it genetic? And I can't, not only am I not as interested in genetics, but I don't have the knowledge to discuss it. But environment and psychology, and particularly with what happens to us, particularly boys, between the ages of, say, 8 and 14, I think is incredibly impactful and ends up defining us. And there's one character in the book, this character Brad, who has these formative experiences pretty much as a middle schooler and then into high school. And they end up absolutely defining him. And I think that's what happens with a lot of boys. And there are 3 characters in the novel, 3 of the central male figures in the novel, who have these defining experiences in and around middle school. And yeah, I was really incredibly, I've always been incredibly interested in that. Of course, starting with my own experiences.
Where you grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Yeah. And how just stuff that happened in and around middle school ended up defining really the trajectory of my entire life.
Yeah, and I think also, and again, it is such a fantastic read. And again, your dialogue is amazing. And the women characters are so smart. And I think that it's such a delight to read, where I'm not giving anything away of the plot in the book, but let's say, okay, one person accidentally sort of cheats on his wife and then is on a phone call with her the next day. And he goes like, oh, I really can't wait to see you. And she immediately goes, are you having an affair? Did you just sleep with someone last? Right. When you hear that dialogue, are you saying it aloud? How do you write that dialogue? What happens when Tim is writing dialogue?
I like to let the characters lead, I guess. And so when that happens to the one male character, or when he does what he does, because he has real agency in it. He's succumbs in a vulnerable moment, but he has agency. I mean, he's responsible for what it is he does. But when I started writing that scene, I didn't know that what happens is going to happen. And when I put the character on the phone the next morning with his wife, she surprised me by intuiting what was going on. And so I think it's like what happens with actors when they improvise. Really good improvisers are able to find stuff in the moment through pure impulse. And I, try to get out of the way and be free to allow that to happen. I heard a story from this actor. I'm on a movie right now in Toronto, and I'm acting with this guy named Bruce Greenwood, and wonderful actor. And he told me this story about a conversation between David Milch and Michael Mann. Michael Mann, the director of Heat and The Insider, a tremendous director, created Miami Vice, a great filmmaker. And David Milch, one of the most important TV showrunners. He did Deadwood, Hill Street Blues, and NYPD Blues. So two really titanic, brilliant figures. And Milch said to Michael Mann, if your mother is dying, do you expect to be at her bedside? And Michael Mann said, well, yes, obviously, of course. And Milch said, with my characters, I never expect that. They may be, they might not be, but to write the characters I write, I want to know that maybe they won't be at the bedside. And getting out of the way of a character by removing the notion of taboo or moral absolutes is just, I loved that story, because I think that's what a writer, a creative person needs to do, is to get out of the way and allow characters to be utterly human and unpredictable.
Wow, I love that story. And I have to say that conversation really did, I didn't know what he was going to say, but it made so much human sense. Like you couldn't predict that it would go that way, but the human sense, and actually even when Brad has his trajectory at the end, it makes, it's sort of John Ratchey, this writer, used to call it retroactive inevitability or retrospective inevitability.
That's, yeah, I have three rules I like to try and follow, and I often fail when I'm writing something, which is it has to be unpredictable, coherent, and inevitable.
Yes.
And it's very hard to get all three of those at once, but a great narrative has to have all three.
Yes. That is, I felt chills when you said that. That is exactly what I felt reading this. It was like unpredictable, like, what is Brad doing? Then you go, this makes total sense. And it made character sense of that he was just I mean, it's a really exciting book to read. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us from Toronto. The book is fantastic. And congratulations, City of Blows. And we can't wait till the next one.
It was really my pleasure to talk to you.
Great conversation, you guys. And thank you so much. We went a little over today, but please join us next month. We've got NPR's Ari Shapiro and Sharon Gless from Cagney and Lacey back in the day going to be talking about her book and an upcoming documentary. If you've got comments, always go to events@scng.com. Send us a message. Thank you, everyone, for making the show. And thank you for everyone for coming back and joining us. Okay, see you next month. Bye.